Hello and welcome. Greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. It is Friday, and it's time for our weekend review. So, for those of you that are new, every week, the Offensive Security team is basically just kind of keeping track of researching, analyzing threats. We also look at things like vulnerabilities and exploits and TTPs that the bad guys are using. And what we want to do is give you a picture of what's important and what you need to be paying attention to over the last week. The goal here is to make you a little more prepared every day than you were the day before. So today you've got myself, Brad, you've got Spencer and Tyler from the Offensive Security team here to talk to you about some pretty cool stuff, right? So I don't want to spoil the thunder, Spencer. So do you want to kind of run down the topics that we have?
Yeah, awesome. Excited for another weekend review. So this week, some important topics on ransomware. So it seems like we're talking about ransomware a lot lately, and with good reason, I guess. So we'll be talking about BlackCat rather ransomware. We'll be talking about LockBit for a minute. We'll be talking about Saitama's, if I'm saying that right, Saitama's Backdoor. Or the Saitama Backdoor. We'll be talking about the DNS tunneling technique that they use, which is kind of interesting. And we'll be talking about the Travis CI logs fiasco, debacle, whatever you want to call it.
And it's still going, right? Apparently.
Yeah. So those are kind of our four topiits. We'll get right into the BlackCat discussion, or BlackCat. I keep saying BlackCat. It's just natural for me to say BlackCat.
Well, it's one of those phrases that live in our kind of eternal vocabulary, and then suddenly somebody comes out with something similar, and it's hard to adapt to. Yeah.
And what's interesting is the ransomware itself, or the Ransomware As A Service operation, is commonly called BlackCat because of the logo. So researchers commonly call it BlackCat. I guess the technical name is ALPHV, but BlackCat is much more catchy, I think. So
sure.
From a branding perspective, I'd want to be called BlackCat.
Yes. It reminds me of the fireworks. You remember playing with those when you were a kid? They come in a pack of like 300, and they're just absurdly loud for no reason.
Oh yeah, those are the best.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at with this ransomware game.
But so a couple interesting articles came out this week, one by Microsoft, one by AdvIntel. Both did kind of a deep dive analysis into the malware, the ransomware that's used, kind of a technical review of that malware. It's Rust-based, which is interesting. And for those that are kind of following along, attackers have moved from, C#, C++ malware to Rust and other languages like NIM and stuff like that, because there's less detections built for those, right? It's newer. It's a different language that hasn't been used a whole lot before. And kind of the TLDR for me from the Microsoft article and ADV is that BlackCat is kind of moving away from open source tools in favor of custom built tooling. They, like I said, they're using a Rust-based locker, and they're using it with much success apparently, because a lot of the ransomware games, malware, are using tried and true tools that have been known for a while, and their BlackCat is moving to more customized tooling, and that's kind of the biggest takeaway for me is, Cobalt Strike is very well known in the malware community. It's used pretty heavily in ransomware attacks. And we have a good idea how to detect Cobalt Strike, right? It's a little bit scary to me that ransomware operators are now moving to custom tooling, because that means it's going to be harder to detect. So I'll open it up for dialogue after that. But that's kind of my TLDR from a couple of these articles.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Right. So it's interesting to me because we've kind of started the migration, and I don't know if this is anomalous, this whole BlackCat thing, if it's anomalous, where this just happens to be a couple of really enterprising cats, boom, that are doing some neat stuff, or if this is a pattern that we expect to see in the future with regards to how the ecosystem of ransomware works. The reason that I feel like it's important is because, like you said, right, this is concerning. It changes the game a little bit. And so we're going from kind of a lazy, what's the minimum I can do to accomplish the goal, to here is a gold standard Cadillac ransomware as a service infrastructure that you can buy and you can leverage. And yeah, I mean, if that's the way it goes, then, you know,
Yeah.
we've seen this in other areas of cyber criminal activity, right? This is not the first time. Ransomware is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen this in the sale of botnets. We've seen this in the sale of DDoS services, and those tend to be much higher quality when they reach, you know, the as a service kind of offering.
Yeah, and in many ways, this is to me like the devil you know is better than the one you don't, right?
Of course, yeah.
You know, we know Cobalt Strike, you know, we know it's kind of indicators, at least out of the box without customizations. We know there's malleable profiles and a little bit about that, you know, from a detection standpoint. But to me, that's better than the alternative, right? So a little bit interesting case here. And just to kind of tack on to that, the Black Cat group was recently, they announced a website. So they published a website after they had compromised a victim, and they were sharing, you know, personal information on that website. So that's an important discovery that was released this week, and I think Krebs was one of the ones that reported on that. So they had breached a luxury spa resort in Western United States and released a website that kind of revealed all that personal information, unfortunately. So they are Black Cat to me seems to be a very much so emerging threat, and one to definitely pay attention to and look out for, especially considering the Rust-based locker that they're using. You know, it's going to be one we'll talk about more in the future for sure.
Yeah, and before we go off the Black Cat topic, I want to add to that just a little bit. There were a couple things in there that really stood out to me as well. Is, you know, we are in the process of standing up a more comprehensive threat intel program, you know, here at Secure IT 360. And one of the things that we have historically done, and I have also done in previous lives, is profile ransomware associated with market verticals and particular threat actors. And if we start creating ransomware as a commodity, that formula ceases to exist. Does that make sense? So, you know, no longer can I look at initial access and say, hey, that method of initial access is probably associated to one of these 4 threat actors who generally use these 3 different types of ransomware. And therefore we can go look in these places, and, you know, it helps accelerate the process. It also helps in negotiating ransoms and, you know, post analysis and all that stuff. If any threat actor out there can just go buy all 3 moving parts,
Yep,
we have no flipping idea who they are. And we're not even tying any more initial access to ransomware types in this nature, right? It's one threat actor is getting initial access and creating persistence, and then passing over to a third threat actor that is buying ransomware from a second threat actor and the underlying infrastructure to support it. Again, we've seen this in the cyber criminal community before. I don't know that we have seen it at this level of sophistication, but it breaks all the rules for, you know, for profiling.
yeah,
So that was kind of my big takeaway. Like, one of the biggest things for me was, you know, we spent all this time and money and research and everything else to try to figure out this is linked to this, that's linked to this, you know, in the ransomware world, and that this breaks all of it. So
yeah. It makes attribution hard. It just makes everything harder.
Right.
And we have to adapt and get better and get smarter. So, yeah.
Wait, are you saying that blacklists aren't the end all be all? I feel like that was personal, Spencer. We can't just use blacklists anymore for Cobalt Strike. Come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, if you're blocking IPs on your firewall, that's great. But yeah, IOCs and hashes, particularly hashes, are past indicators, right? It's good good prevention for things in the past, right? Not necessarily new.
Yeah, agreed.
So the next kind of topic we had was LockBit. So LockBit 2.0 first emerged June 2021 as a successor to LockBit, obviously. And there was a really nice article by Palo Alto's Unit 42 that talked about how LockBit 2.0 was the most widely deployed ransom variant they have observed in first quarter 2022. That's above all other variants that they had done investigations on or had incidents on. And what I thought was interesting, and I wanted to bring this discussion to the table here, was given the verticals that Secure IT 360 does business in, this article by Palo Alto said that its most highly targeted industry vertical included professional services, which included legal, construction, wholesale, and retail, and manufacturing. So a lot of verticals that we do a lot of business with, I have a lot of clients with, and LockBit 2.0 has been seen to double down, or I guess triple down in this sense, and they're using denial of service as a means of extortion, right? So not only are they ransoming, but they're exfilling the data, and then they're DOSing you, to kind of hold you ransom and kind of just, kick you when you're down, so to speak.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. And this is another ransomware as a service outfit, right?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. It actually, yeah. So that, I think
believe they are.
It's part of the reason. Yeah, it looks like they're up there with like Reboot, Darkside, and Revel and stuff like that. So a lot of those have fallen away. And it looks like LockBit has overtaken them. Some of them are just kind of oldies that have just stayed around. I think Revel's gone, but yeah, all of that said, holding a 46% market share is substantial. And again, there's no attribution to particular threat actors. It's just this RaaS, right? This ransomware as a service. So
yeah, and they like to work with. Apparently, they like to work with initial access brokers. So it says in that Palo Alto article that they prefer to work with initial access brokers who are more skilled than a typical broker would be.
Yep.
Actors that are skilled with Cobalt Strike and Metasploit and things like that. So it seems to me like BlackCat, LockBit, those are two big ones to kind of watch out for and paying attention to in the future. And the 2.0, kind of a backstory on that, is apparently in March, I believe, of this year, VX Underground posted a tweet with details of the new version of LockBit 2.0. Apparently, researchers were able to get access, or they were able to decrypt the first version. There was a bug with LockBit 2.0 that allowed researchers to revert the encryption process on a MS SQL database, according to the article. So
nice.
Interesting case of researchers kind of figuring this out, and then the ransomware operators or the creators kind of doubling down or like we talked about in improving upon their ransomware to avoid detection and further research. So they're definitely on the rise as well. Obviously, they have means and motivation, and I think this will be something to pay attention to.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, we're probably going to spend a little bit of time, paying close attention to these particular commodities as the year progresses. I expect to see more of them.
Yeah, and the new version, apparently, according to that tweet by VX Underground, it's dubbed LockBit Black. So I don't know what it is. BlackCat, LockBit Black. I mean,
I don't
something
know.
with
Yeah, something with the color black. I don't know.
Yep.
I'll go ask all of my cyber criminal friends, but I assume it has something to do with good and bad. But
Yep. But great research, great article by Palo Alto. Likewise, Microsoft and AdvIntel on their research on BlackCat.
agreed.
So really good stuff. The next topic was Saitama, the backdoor.
Yeah.
This is they use a relatively interesting DNS tunneling technique. So Saitama is a backdoor, and they use DNS tunneling, which is that's something that's been known for a while, right? There's a MITRE attack technique for it. But this particular backdoor is interesting because it hides the C2 messages. It encapsulates them in the IP address, the IPv4 address itself. So it doesn't send it. It doesn't send the commands through text records or other DNS records like you would expect DNS tunneling to do. Actually, like I said, encapsulates the messages in the IPv4 addresses themselves, which I thought was kind of interesting. So kind of an interesting technique. Not that this particular backdoor is kind of targeting the industries or verticals or organizations that we would be, looking for or assisting.
Right.
But the technique, itself, I think is the important part and something to discuss and think about from a detection standpoint.
Yeah, it's fascinating because historically, and I think that's what makes this interesting. Historically, DNS tunneling has used FQDNs, and it's really evident, right? Like when you make a DNS tunneling request, it doesn't look like jobs.company.com. It looks like gibberish, and therefore it's anomalous in its appearance in DNS logs, right? Assuming, by the way, let's talk about remediation just for a quick second. Don't allow DNS requests straight out of your network, right? And your DNS requests that you're pulling downstream should be being logged, at least from a forensic perspective. So I should, as a end user inside your environment, I should not be able to directly DNS query the internet, right? I should have to go through a DNS server that you control in your environment. That almost completely nukes DNS tunneling out of the gate, or at least lets you track it better because it's not on the endpoint anymore. It's at a central location. That doesn't help us here, right?
Yep.
So that, to me, that's interesting about this is it kind of nukes our current detection capability for DNS tunneling. Because I mean, let's be real, man. Most mature organizations are detecting DNS tunneling, right? I know, for example, we've gone up against the Canaries a couple of times, right? The Thinks Canaries. They use DNS tunneling by default for their command and communication back to their, the web portal.
Yep.
And we have, in most environments that are deploying those, have to go make an exception in whatever security tool is locking DNS down. So anyway, I don't go off on too big of a tangent there, but it's interesting, right?
Yeah. An interesting kind of corollary to that, or OffSec tech for that, is blocking those DNS. If there's Canaries, right? Blocking those DNS or those domains that Thinkers Canary would communicate with, which is why if you're deploying Canaries, it's recommended you deploy those on your network. There's actual Canary servers, that you deploy on your network that can be a bit more robust than the public servers that they use. So, little sidebar.
It's kind of cool. This is the kind of stuff that fascinates me the most, right? Is when somebody finds a new way to do an old technique, and we should, as defenders, be writing rules for this right now.
Yep. And it's nuanced too. It's like, okay, DNS tunneling, not using text records, using IP addresses as a communication channel. So it's those slight nuances that I think are pretty interesting too, in those edge cases that we see used in like a new technique. And even though it might not be very widespread, it might not be used by a lot of groups, it might not be a very popular technique.
Right.
Being able to detect those things and write some rules for those, even from a limited standpoint, I think is a good endeavor. No,
I completely agree. It'd be a good use of time. I'm actually not even entirely sure how you would write rules for this. I would have to understand the capabilities of the analysis engine and know what my options are, because just off the top of my head, this is a tough one.
Yeah. My thought would be maybe the same way you would, we were kind of talking in jest about IOCs and Blacklist, right? Maybe it's something that could be akin to a Blacklist, right? Like we talked about with the DBIR podcast and other things we've talked about before, is a far majority of the remote code execution attempts that we saw on the internet come from 99.6% of the
Valid.
same IPs of the same IP, or this IP has been seen before, 99% before.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. Yeah.
Maybe blacklisting helps, IP reputation services and things like that maybe helps. But yeah, that could be a tough one. It's something to test and reproduce, and see how we can detect that.
Yep, agreed. And it looks like the Python code is available. Yeah, it's already out there. So Morphus Labs stuck it out there on GitHub, so you could actually get it and use it to kind of work through the process.
Yeah, I like
cool.
it.
Good stuff.
The last story is quite interesting to me because it's something we had talked about. We had touched on previously in previous podcasts and things like that. But this story is the Travis CI API has exposed credentials, has exposed clear text data via log files. So the Travis CI logs, those were exposed to the internet. This had been previously reported, and I think it's kind of an endemic problem, right, with a lot of these cloud services that have these logs, that have these services available to the internet. In one of the articles, it was mentioned that further analysis of 20,000 logs revealed that as many as 73,000 tokens, access keys, and other credentials associated with various services like GitHub, AWS, etc., were exposed. So that was from Aquasec. So interesting stuff. GitHub obviously sent out a warning. Some of you listening who subscribe to such things might have seen a notice from GitHub that there was an attacker that was able to gain access. Kind of the point of this story was to just talk about this as a whole, right? Of what this means and kind of what we should be doing about this and how we should handle this from a CI/CD perspective. So I thought it'd be a good one to kind of discuss and bring up in this podcast.
I do too. Yeah, no, I think this is really good, right? And this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart too, because this is a world that I live in, but also we are currently developing as a product here at Security 360. So, let's quickly level set, because Travis CI may be something that is not familiar to some folks. But the idea behind it is that you will use it to automatically do testing and building of projects that you host, for example, at somewhere like GitHub. So you put your project out there, and then you can use Travis CI to kind of build, run, test, different things. And so it's part of a CI/CD process. The trouble is, because it has to go through multiple build steps and potentially multiple test scenarios, there will be keys and credentials involved, right? And it sounds like that those keys and credentials for free tier users specifically drop into a kind of a central log file, I guess. And then that log file is publicly available, which blows my mind, right? What is the functional reason to have a log file publicly available like that? And it kind of sounds dirty because it almost makes me think Travis CI is like, yeah, okay, cool. So use our good service if you don't want us to disclose your secrets and log files. Like, okay, wait, let me ask that a different way. Like, why are you disclosing log files to the public internet, man? I don't know. It's just the whole thing is bizarre to me. It's bizarre because the developers at Travis understand that those secrets are going to go into the log file, right? And they made a conscious decision to make that public.
Yeah.
Wow. Good job, guys.
Yeah, this is not the first time this has happened. Obviously, it won't be the last. This kind of ties into some of the supply chain discussions we were having a couple podcasts ago, or last podcast, the week in review, where we were talking about, libraries, right? GitHub repositories that have the owner has gone dormant, or they've abandoned the project, and somebody registers an email using their domain, right? Their domain expires or something like that, and they've lost interest in a project, they're no longer maintaining it, their domain expires, and then somebody takes that over, right? And it's maybe a project used by tens of thousands of organizations. I think this kind of falls somewhat into those same realms, where it's like, okay, we have this service and it's got this weblog, and now we're going to be getting keys for all these organizations who use this service. So it's something to pay attention to, and it's something that is interesting to me from an external pen test perspective, from a recon perspective. Doing everybody's familiar with Google dorking. Well, there's GitHub dorking too, right? So,
yes, there is.
Pretty interesting to me, attack surface too, and recon.
Yeah, and along the same road, I was actually just this morning, one of our healthcare organizations that we work with reached out to me, and apparently there's an ongoing issue of metadata bleeding from like Facebook and other places where it has been integrated into their website. So, like you go to, healthcare.com, and then on that page, there's a little, JavaScript add-on for Facebook. Well, all of that is generating metadata, right? And Facebook has all that information. And suddenly, I guess they're leaking it. I haven't had time to really dig into it, but it begs the question that everything that you interact with, everything that you integrate with, are you checking it, right? Are you doing your due diligence? Because if I, as an organization, did not identify potential risk in using, again, we're talking about free tier, so it's a little different, but everything you use presents risk in some capacity, right? Even if it's just a Facebook add-on to your website.
Yep.
This perfectly illustrates that.
Yep, definitely.
And actually, you know what? I want to say one more thing about this too before we give up on it, because I love this subject so much. We ran into a similar situation with this a long time ago when I worked in a financial institution. One of our developers, we didn't know this, was writing code for us and storing it in his GitHub profile, right? as a repo. Like that's when he went to college, and like his entire lifestyle was, you write your code, you send it up to GitHub because that's where you put your code, right? But there were secrets in that code that were being uploaded, and we're talking like usernames and passwords, not just like API keys. So like legitimate stuff being uploaded. Now we were doing dark web monitoring, which included things like GitHub and Pastebin and stuff like that, and we found it within hours. But this kind of scenario with Travis CI could expose organizations who don't even use Travis CI. If their developers are just trying to be good developers and out there leveraging this to increase the speed by which they do build testing. So yeah, scary times, man.
Yep.
All right. I think that's it, right? Was that the last thing?
That was the last one. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. So quick wrap up. That's all we have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it. The best thing you can do if you did is share this with your friends, right? We want to reach as many people as we can. Feel free to leave a rating for us wherever you are, podcast, YouTube, whatever, method that you're consuming this. And other than that, have an awesome weekend. Check out our blog over at offsec.blog, and we will see you next week.
See ya.